Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to look at Dragon Strike. In a time of magic and mystery, heroes rise to the challenge. Now, of course, back in the 90s, you had the big hitters of the dungeon crawling board game. You had Hero Quest, you had the Dungeons and Dragons board games, for instance, and this falls somewhere in the middle. It's light and easy to play, like Hero Quest, but it does have a little bit, just a little taste of the depth that you would get with the Dungeons and Dragons type games. One notable feature is that it comes with a VHS, which was filmed entirely in hyper-reality, which is slightly odd. It's unique, at least. We're not really going to look at the VHS in this video, because I want to look at that when I've got a few people around here to be exposed to it for the first time and get their reactions, because I've seen it a million times already, because I used to play this all the time as a wee lad. Halfling Pete and I used to play it regularly, and we used to watch the video pretty much every time, because it was so entertaining. Ages 10 to adult. Sounds about right, you might be able to get away with a little bit younger. 2 to 6 players, yep. Although you'll see why I disagree with the 2 to 6 players thing in a minute. So, opening up the box, first thing you'll see, we have the boards. I'm going to open them out so you can see that they are double-sided. On one side you have this cave, which is for some of the missions, and on the other side you have a castle. Now, down the side of the board there's a counter here, which keeps track of the turn, and then each individual mission will have a set point at which the dragon will come into play. If you're taking too long, basically, then the dragon's going to come and get you. And it's the toughest enemy in the game, so you don't want to play too slowly. Looking at the next one, we have a nice kind of outdoor area here, which gives a little bit of variety. And then, next we have kind of a town. This is probably the closest to the Hero Quest board of the 4. Very, very similar. Inside the box, now I was very, very lucky with this one. I picked this up at the UK Games Expo, and generally with board games that have miniatures, people will just treat them like board games, and they'll just throw all the models in there, and there'll be pieces broken off where the board has crushed them, snapped off the top of their weapons and whatnot. But the previous owner of this game did look after the miniatures and kept them in this box here. So, let's have a look at some of those now, because they're the most exciting part. So here we have the warrior next to his wonderful visage from the VHS. Doesn't bear too much of a resemblance. I'm not sure whether the video was made completely separately from the rest of the game, but it doesn't really match the contents very well. But as you can see, they're fairly well detailed for a board game. And this is one of the prime parts that you'll find has sometimes snapped off. This sword here. But thankfully this one is perfectly intact. So, lovely. There you can see the warrior in all his glory. And to give you an example of the back of one of these cards, and to show you basically how simple the game is, you track your hit points by putting a little slider on there, moving it down when you take damage, moving it back up if you're healed. Speed, 6 spaces, simple enough. And there's 3 kinds of dice in the game. There's the black dice, which is a D12, the blue dice, which is a D8, and the white dice, which is a D10, which isn't on this particular card, because the warrior doesn't use that for anything. And most of the time you'll be trying to roll 6 or above. So if you want to find and disarm a trap, he uses the D8, you need to roll 6 or above. Simple. So obviously, the higher number of sides on your dice, the easier it is to do. And then attacking is a little bit different, because that'll compare to your opponent's armor class. You can see his armor class is 6, so that means someone would have to roll a 6 or higher to damage him on their particular dice, whichever colour they get. So it's very, very easy. And at the bottom it's got a list of his equipment: sacks, rope, food, mirror, metal spike. And that gives you a little bit of opportunity to be a bit creative and role play a bit while you're playing the game. You can use your imagination a little bit and think, okay, well, I want to get to that enemy who's on that cliff face. How about if I tie the metal spike to the rope and throw it up there, use it like a grappling hook? At which point the Dragon Master would say, okay, well, let's have a feat of dexterity to see if you can get up there using that technique. And then they'd roll the dice, and they'd either fail or they'd succeed. And there are guides for the Dragon Master as to which particular feats would fall under which category. Here we have the elf, who again only vaguely resembles his counterpart in the video. The miniature seems to be wearing a hat, which the guy in the film never wore once. But I'm sure with a bit of paint on them you could make them more closely resemble their counterparts. This is another prime piece for breaking, because it looks a little bit flimsy, doesn't it, there? The bow. But this one's in perfectly good condition. Next we have the thief, or as the film would like you to remember her. Round about there, I think. So this miniature, not a whole lot going on, she's just being very sneaky in like a cloak that again she'd never really wore in the video. Next we have the wizard. This is one of the nicely detailed ones. His hands, you'd think, are a little bit flimsy, so again I was lucky that this previous owner looked after the miniatures. Again, doesn't really resemble his counterpart there, because he's not wearing an animal on his head, which the character did all the way through the video. Next we have the dwarf. Now this is a completely baffling one. For a start, the dwarf on the card is not the same dwarf as the one in the video. Totally different. He does vaguely resemble the miniature here, I suppose, but again, nothing like the one in the video. So I don't know where they got this dwarf from for the card. Maybe they had a different dwarf originally and then he got ill or something and he was replaced at the last minute. But he's not even dressed in even similar outfit. The dwarf in the video uses a hammer, this guy's got an axe. So I'm not sure what was going on there. Maybe it's not supposed to be the same dwarf. Who knows? And finally, I don't know where they rustled this guy up from, but this is the male thief. The male thief that does not appear in the video at all. I have no idea what he's doing in there. This is why I dispute that it's a 6-player game. Because really, who would want to be this guy? He's not even in the video, and you've already got a thief. So I don't know why he even exists. Maybe they just felt they wanted it to be a 6-player game, and the thief was the only class that wouldn't be overpowered to have 2 of. Who knows? But the miniature's alright. It's just no one want to be him because you don't have that amusing point of reference. Now onto the monsters. We have a couple of gargoyles here. They're reasonably detailed, I suppose. Decent for 90s board game standards. And of course they're in the right colour, being grey. They're supposed to be kind of stone-like. So that's one of the features of this game. You'll notice that most of the monsters are in a colour that is appropriate. For example, the troll is green. Nice big nose on him there, as you'd expect from a troll. 4 bugbears. These are some of the weaker enemies in the game, but again, pretty decent detail on them. We have the giant, who's quite a hefty fellow, carrying a big boulder around with him. In grey, again, kind of makes sense. We have the fire elemental, which does look very flame-like, if not a lot like the one in the video, but that's a running theme with all these miniatures, really. We have 3 orcs, which in this world are more like goblins, really. They're the weakest and stupidest of all the enemies that you'll encounter. 3 death knights, which might be my favourite models. They're not the best detail, but they are just quite cool. The idea of these kind of skeleton knights. Also, you'll notice that each of these models, if you haven't noticed already, has a number on their foot. So you can see 1, 2 and 3 on these guys. This is because on the Dragon Master screen, which I'll be getting to shortly, each one of the monsters that has multiple hit points has its own little hit point slider, so you can keep track of which one's taken damage easily. We have the evil wizard. Again, nothing like the one in the video, but he looks kind of cool. We have the man scorpion, which comes in 2 parts. The front legs slot in there. I do like this model, actually. And the idea of just a man scorpion is kind of a cool monster in the first place, isn't it? Next we have the dragon, who is quite tasty looking. You'll notice that he's only got 1 wing there. That's because this one goes on separately. The only minor piece of damage to any of these miniatures is that one of the little notches there has come out. But that's not a big deal. It can always just be glued on, if need be. Also, a couple of his fingers have come off as well. which isn't too big of a deal. They could easily be remade. I don't know why this is the only one that sustained any damage. It looks like maybe someone stepped on it, and all the others were perfectly preserved. Moving on to the dice. Now, these were not the original dice in the game. I bought these separately at the expo, because this game was lacking the original dice. It did have all the correct dice in there. They just weren't in the right colours, because the owner had obviously lost them and then just replaced them with whatever they had to hand. So, I bought some replacements so they match up with the dice on the cards, as you can see there. Just to make it easier for people playing it, so they know which dice they have to use just from the colour. Keeps it nice and simple. Next, we have an absolute ton of cards. We have treasure cards, just to give you a little bit of an example of some of the stuff you might see in there. Elven Cloak, Gauntlets of Ogre Power, which make you do double damage when you cause damage on a monster, just 2 hit points instead of 1. Potion of Invulnerability, increases your armor class. Ring of Protection, and so on. You'll be given some of these at the start of the adventure at random, and you'll also find them throughout the adventure in various treasure chests. So there are a lot of different treasure cards there. Monster cards, which are nice for reference, so the players can have a look at that and see what kind of monster they're going to be coming up against. A little bit of information about the bugbear, for example. 8-foot tall brute likes to attack with blunt axe. Most bugbearers dumb as posts, but they can talk. So it just lets you know, yeah, you can probably talk to that monster if you want. You don't just have to attack it instantly. And since they're quite dumb, maybe you can trick them. So obviously you need the Dragon Master to play along, which they're generally willing to do, because it's not really a competitive environment. The Dragon Master is really there to make the adventure challenging, but also fun. Ideally they want the heroes to win, but they want it to be difficult. Gargoyles. Gargoyle can talk, but it's not very smart. Many gargoyles are cowards. That would say that gargoyles probably aren't going to initiate a fight unless you provoke them somehow. So very, very handy to have all the monster information on the cards like that. Sneak attacks, which are handed out to the thief at the start of the adventure. Generally you'll get 5 of them. These allow the thief to attack with a black dice instead of the blue one, but obviously you can only do it a limited number of times. Another reason I would question whether there should be 2 thieves in there, because there are only 5 of these cards, and most of the missions you get 5. So what's the other thief supposed to use? Traps, of course, when you step on a trap. If you haven't searched the room properly, and you step on one of the squares that on the Dragon Master's map is marked as a trap, you'll then generate one of these cards. You've triggered a trap. Poisonous gas fills the trap location, plus every adjacent space. Figures struck by poisonous gas must save versus magic successfully, or they lose 1 hit point. So they're all pretty similar to that. Sleeping gas. Broken trap, if you get lucky. Jaws of Death trap. And yes, I am aware that the T does kind of look like a C in this font, but we'll avoid that obvious joke. It's been done to death. Whichever character you're playing, you get a reference card. It'll tell you a little bit about your character, tells you what you're good at. And on the back, it gives you a little bit of a tip as well. Tells you what you can do in the turn. Move, then perform 1 action, or perform 1 action, then move. And then it gives you a list of all the things you might want to do. Attack, cast a spell, search for treasure, find and disarm traps. Tells you how close you have to be to search for traps, and so on. Search for secret passages, question a monster. So very, very handy for the player to have to hand. Gives them some idea of what they can be doing in the turn. We have hero spells, which you'll choose at the start of the game. Some first level spells, second level, third level at the back there. The elf gets a couple of spells, and the wizard obviously gets quite a lot. So if we look at some examples, Lightning Bolt. Powerful bolt travels straight from your fingertips into the direction of your choice. Every figure in line with the bolt must save versus magic. Those who fail lose 2 hit points. So that's quite a powerful, potent one, but once you use it, the card does go away. So you have to use them sparingly a little bit. Third level spells are obviously more powerful, but you get less of them. Second level knock, you can open a door that is locked. And then the first level spells, simple ones, such as shield, This spell gives you, or another hero, base armor class of 7. And then it tells you how long it lasts, and you can put a little clip there and count it down. Cure Light Wounds. This spell immediately restores 4 hit points to any hero, but again, they're only one use. Then finally, we have the spells for the evil wizard Teraptus. When he's in play, he has his own set of spells, which are quite tasty. He has some of the same ones, like Lightning Bolt, Dispel Magic. Next up, we have a big pile of clips. These are used for obviously holding up cards. You would use these ones to, for instance, hold up your hero card, like so, and then you can just sit your hero card up and then it promptly falls over. Yeah, then they don't tend to stay up very well, unfortunately, but then again they don't really need to. Of course, you've got your little marker here which you're going to slide down there to show the hit points. As you take damage, it goes down until you're dead. Also, to keep track of spell effects on those that require it. These little black ones are used to hold up the card doors, which I'll get to in a minute, because everyone loves doors. So let's move them out of the way. Next, we have the various card tokens and doors that you'll use throughout the game. Treasure chests, of course, very important. Doors, very important. Wings that say in air, which just let everyone know that the model standing on this is currently floating, because that will affect how they play in the game. Darkness, if a room is overcome with darkness, you put that in there. Secret passages. Charmed, if a monster has become charmed as a result of a spell. Fire. All very useful stuff. Some of these were missing from this copy of the game, so I ordered some more on eBay, which weren't too obscenely priced. So that's nice. Also, you've got your various magical items here. Scepter. There'll be some missions where you have to retrieve particular scepters. Next, we have the instructions. Essentially, the rule book tells you how to play. Gives you the contents of the box there. Tells you what to do with all the components. Getting started. It's not too complex, and the thing with this game, only the Dragon Master really needs to read this. They're the only player that needs to know the rules to any great degree. The rest of them, as long as they have some imagination and they know what they want their character to do, they can really be told what they need to get on the dice, and it's really, really easy to get into that way. Tells you all about attacking, line of sight and so on, casting spells, disarming traps. Talking to monsters gives you some advice on that. Performing a feat, special terrain, what all the things on the cards mean. It's very useful. Also tells you about creating your own adventures, so it gives you some blank maps here that you could, back then, presumably photocopy. Now you just scan it into your computer. And the symbols, what each one of them means on the maps. Next we have the Adventures book. This is for the Dragon Master. It'll give you all the information on each one of the missions. It doesn't give you the maps in here, they're in a separate book, which I'll show you in a second. But for example, against the giant here, that's one of the missions. It'll tell you how monsters will probably react when questioned, what's in the various treasure chests, and your various setup options, which markers and doors and whatnot you'll need for the mission, which is very useful, very easy. They have one of those for all of the missions in the game. We have the map book. I'm not going to show too much of this because I don't want it to be a spoiler for anybody, but you can see here, you can see that the various monsters and treasure and all that are marked on the map for the Dragon Master. I'm not going to go any further into that, just so no one sees it and subconsciously memorises the layout of any of the missions if they then want to play it. Next we have the Dragon Master screen, which you put up in front of you and then put your map behind it so the players can't see it. It's got various information in there, like what the monsters can do in their turns. It's really the rules basics on here, so you don't have to be consulting the rulebook constantly, and it gives you all the monster information, what their armor class is, what dice they use to attack, how many hit points they have, how fast they are. It tells you how to use the dragon, special features that certain monsters have, for example trolls regenerating and so on. Down the side you can see all the monsters there, which you'll then put the slider in, so you can keep track of their hit points. You'll notice that orcs on either side. That's because they only have 1 hit point, so you don't really need to track that. Right down to the evil wizard there. Got the basics of running an adventure, various feats, which category they would fall under when it comes to dice rolling. So you've got that all right in front of your face as you're playing, so it's very easy. The only problem I would have with this, a slight qualm if you will, is that it's difficult to fit the map book inside this. It's a little bit of a stretch. So it's difficult to hide the entire map screen, so you'll end up improvising probably, maybe using half the game box as a shield instead of just this. So, not too much of a problem though. Next, now, this is interesting. If you love Dragon Strike so much and you want to join their club, then you had the opportunity to do so. I don't know whether anything actually came of this back in the day, but apparently you could get a t-shirt and a miniature for an initial fee of only $20, looks like. Well, if you want to be a Dragon Knight, I'm pretty sure it's not still running, but you never know. Also a little bit of advertising material in there for Dungeons and Dragons, one of their board games, which are a little more advanced than this. And finally, the best part of the whole game, the VHS. Never buy a copy of this game if it doesn't have the VHS with it, because it is by far the best part. Although I suppose you could just go and watch it on YouTube, couldn't you? There are plenty of people out there that have it. So, look at that. Beautiful. I do need to find a VHS player now though, so I can actually watch that in all its glory rather than just resorting to the YouTube route. But if you get a chance to watch this in its original format, it will take you kicking and screaming, drag you all the way back to the 90s. The special effects are pretty terrible, but, well, even then they were terrible. They're still terrible, but they're amazingly terrible. You'll understand what I mean when you see it. It's a joy to behold in its terribleness. So there we have it. You've now seen all the contents of Dragon Strike. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as soon as I get a chance to play it with enough people who are willing to be on video, you better believe that is going to be videoed. That's going to be very, very entertaining, I think. So you can look forward to that in the future. Ta-ta for now, ladies and gentlemen.